From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub Podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Good morning, security gang, and welcome to another episode of the CyberHub Podcast. I'm obviously on the road traveling, but we've got a packed show for all of y'all today, Tuesday, December 10th, 2024. Let's get the show rolling. But for all of y'all that have got your cup of coffee cup, cheers. Thank you for tuning in. Let's get the ball rolling here with Radiant Capital giving more information on the $50 million heist that went through the DeFi project back in October. So all of this really did not start in October. It started in September when a former contractor sent a message to an existing, essentially, engineer within the company with a new PDF about a new job auditing smart contracts. And the message was sent through Telegram. The engineer took it, and which is quite standard, a third-party contractor who worked with the company for a while. They trusted him. They knew who he was, who he or she were. And so this was kind of shared to get some feedback from the team. That essentially opened the door for this attack that ended up identifying business processes that the company did, and then using those business processes against the company in order to perpetrate a $50 million fraud. And the post-mortem talks about deceiving the safe wallet verification process by essentially infecting 3 developers with malware and infecting their devices. And then they were used to sign fraudulent transactions during what was already happening as a routine multi-signature emissions adjustment process, meaning an actual real business process for the project. And this led to them draining $50 million from core markets, as well as exploiting open approvals and withdraw funds from user accounts during this whole progress. And again, this kind of shows you how sophisticated some of these threat actors are, especially from a nation state, especially North Koreans who really do target the crypto market in order to launder and finance the government in North Korea that's under extensive sanctions. And so they're studying the business process. They're identifying the methods of which to get in, get out without raising any alarms. And then by the time they do, it's too late. And this is exactly what happened here. We see that this was done essentially almost executed perfectly. No one raised an eyebrow. No one batted an eyebrow until something happened a few days later. And it took them a few months to actually do this. It probably took them, 3 to 4 weeks to do a full reconnaissance. It took them probably a few months beforehand to identify and potentially infiltrate the folks that were associated with the company, whether directly or indirectly. And again, the North Koreans do a great job of social engineering. So they're going after people for work, right? I mean, we saw what they did to KnowBe4 in terms of the IT work and kind of like, IT contractors and help desk employees. So it's up their wheelhouse. We have to update our processes to deal with these advanced threats because we got to operate a business kind of, and I can't believe I'm saying this. If you've been watching the show for as long as I've been doing it now, almost 7 years, you'll know that zero trust was a word I despised. But it really, we do have to operate under a zero trust mentality, even when it comes to some of our business process, and really tighten those down as well. So that's our leadoff story for the day. But Artivion, which is a leading manufacturer of heart surgery medical devices, disclosing a November 21st ransomware attack. The company filed their 8K filing, which is how we know of the attack, because really no ransomware group has claimed responsibility for the attack, and there's nothing on any leak site. Now, they didn't in their SEC filing say it was a ransomware attack, but the TTPs they describe of stolen data with encrypted systems is textbook ransomware. The Atlanta-based company employs 1,250 people worldwide, and they've got sales representative in more than 100 countries with manufacturing facilities in Atlanta, Georgia, Austin, Texas, and Hessenberg, Germany. They say that their insurance will cover most IR incident response related costs. However, they will incur additional costs that insurance likely will not cover. So we'll see how that's happening. Yesterday, we talked about Romania's presidential election and kind of the crisis going on in the country. Well, now Electrica Group, which is one of the largest electricity distributors for the country that serves more than 3.8 million customers in Romania, publishing a note of an ongoing cyber attack against their infrastructure. The teams are working with the national cybersecurity authorities in Romania to resolve the attack and limit its impact. They're saying that their critical systems weren't impacted or have not been infected, and so whenever affected, so when they say that, it essentially means that their OT systems are operating just fine. The attack is likely against some of their IT systems, which some of those are required in order to operate the OT systems. And so but the beauty of OT is you can really move back to manual work. And that's the one advantage of OT, is you can really kind of take away the IT system and still work on the OT network. They're obviously still working. This is a fresh story. We'll keep you in loop as to what goes on there. Chinese attackers are getting extremely sophisticated. And again, we saw that with the North Korean one, and now we're seeing that with this story where Chinese attackers, specifically Sandman APT, is using a large are targeting large IT service providers in Southern Europe, abusing the Visual Studio Code tunnels to maintain persistent remote access to some of the compromised systems. For those that have a big DevOps or application teams, you're very well aware of VS Code within the Microsoft kind of remote development feature and kind of the Microsoft ecosystem. These tunnels, which are all created within the Microsoft ecosystems and have and executables are signed by Microsoft, are naturally trustworthy. So what the Chinese threat actors did here in this specific tactic, which likely was a test because they only really did it for about 3 weeks, and it was likely a small test for them to see if this actually works and kind of how to make the operation far more effective. But what we see here from Sentinel Labs and Tenexa Cyber, they dubbed this campaign Operation Digital Eyes, and what they saw was the group behind it was essentially achieving initial access using automated SQL injection exploitation tool called SQL Map. They were doing that against internet-facing web and database services. Once they've established access, they deployed a PHP-based web shell called PHP Cert, which allowed them to execute commands remotely, introduce additional payloads. They then, for lateral movement, they used the RDP and passed the hash type of attacks using Mimikatz for that. And then once they got in, they downloaded a legitimate version of Visual Studio Code and then created their own tunnel parameters enabling remote access. And that doesn't set any alarms because it's totally normal, kind of showing you how you need to audit and control your infrastructure as security practitioners is really important based on the sophistication of our threat actors. And in the Russia-Ukraine front, we're seeing new types of attacks still happening from Russia. This one by the Ukrainian military CERT, talking about a recent attack targeting the defense industrial complex by sending phishing emails disguised as invitations to a legitimate defense conference that took place in Kiev last week. This is being attributed to Russia. They were trying to steal credentials of users. They were trying to do that through Signal, Telegram, and WhatsApp, or even some of the local military systems like Delta, Teneta, and Kropoyava. In addition to account compromises, they were also carrying out cyber attacks to gain unauthorized remote access to computers of employees within the Ukraine Defense Industrial Complex and Defense Forces. Russia continues to be malign in that nature. If you haven't checked out our Substack, go check out my Substack, jamesazar.substack.com. In fact, going into 2025, Substack will be really our only platform. We'll be kind of rebranding it as CyberHub Podcast. It'll have everything there. It'll kind of be our main place to post all of our content and grow the show going into 2025 and beyond. So go subscribe. And now it's absolutely free. jamesazar.substack.com. Microsoft is releasing fresh guidance to organizations on how to mitigate NTLM related attacks. By default, this is coming days after researchers reported finding a NTLM hash disclosure 0-day in all versions of Windows workstations and servers from Windows 7 to Windows 11. However, it's not immediately clear if the two are related or just coincidental in terms of timing. Nonetheless, this is something that may not have a patch for months, according to Microsoft, with an April date potentially to address it. So there are some mitigations to it. A really long story, but we'll put this in our show notes so y'all can catch it there. Yesterday, we talked about the suspects arrested in Belgium and the Netherlands. Well, now we know that these guys were operating a sophisticated cybercrime group, primarily operating call centers at a luxury Airbnbs and apartment rentals all across Europe. So they were kind of moving around. And then they were using those call centers in order to pretend to be bank employees calling victims and then getting their hands on their banking in order to finance a lifestyle of fancy watches, clothes, and nights at posh nightclubs, stealing millions and millions of dollars from millions and millions of euros from European victims. And obviously, there's a whole lot to go with that. Finally, President-elect Donald Trump's picked to chair the FCC. Brendan Carr, who's been on the 5-person commission since 2017, began to receive intelligence briefings after President Trump tapped him to run the FCC. The information he learned made him basically want to smash his phone because of the Salt Typhoon attack. He said we shouldn't be in this situation and plans to address this head on by supporting the intelligence community and obviously adding more and more regulation. We'll see how that kind of comes to fruition in the future. That's it for our show this morning. We'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern live with all the latest and greatest. Until then, have a great rest of your day. And most importantly, y'all, stay cyber safe.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.